Did you know that you actually do not have to pay debt collectors or collection agencies when they're hitting you up for money for an old debt, maybe from a long time ago or a more recent debt? Well, in this video, I'm going to share with you exactly how you have a legal standing against these debt collectors and collection agencies, how you actually technically legally do not owe them, and why you should not pay them if they're trying to hit you up for the money and you simply don't have it. So I have a lot to cover in a very short period of time in this video, so let's get into it. So I know a lot of you will, out of the gates, try to argue with me saying, well, Monica, I signed something in the fine print when I opened up my Capital One credit card, a long time ago that says that they could transfer my debt, blah, 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 blah. Okay, well, show me the documentation. See, most people don't have the documentation because it actually does not exist. And yes, debt collectors can pick up credit from anywhere, credit profiles from any major bank. They usually buy them in lots. So for example, they'll buy like 1,000 debts from, say, Capital One or something. And they will take these debts and they will collect on them, knowing that there's a fair percentage of people that will actually pay on the debt. And many times these debt collectors will pay for these debts, anywhere from 6 to 20 cents on the dollar for the debt. So for example, if you owed Capital One $1,000, they might have purchased that debt for, pennies on the dollar. So they might have even purchased it for like, say, $100. And so if they decide to go after you and even collect 50% of the debt, say they collect $500 from you after harassing you for months and months on end, you finally give them their $500 settlement that they offered to you in a letter, they've made $400 on your debt. And this is how the debt collection game works. So a lot of people don't understand the behind the scenes on how debt collecting works and how they use fear tactics as a marketing and sales method. That's the only way that they can get you to pay, is fear and harassment. And so in this video, I'm going to share with you what your legal standing is, why technically you actually don't owe them the debt because they're not the original debtor or the original creditor, and how you can turn the tables on them and potentially even cash out big, especially if they're harassing you and violating federal law. So first and foremost, let's talk about the collection gig, if you will, or the business of collections and debt collecting and how it works and how they normally typically start going after you. So then that way you could set yourself up properly, because most people will bury their head in the sand. The very moment that they get a letter from a collection agency or a debt collector, they throw it away and they don't respond and they just hope that it just goes away on its own. And that's the last thing that you should do, okay? So first and foremost, let's talk about what we call the debt collector entry point, the entry point into your life. So say, for example, you have a charge off on your credit report with Capital One, for example, and what ends up happening is over time, Capital One will take the tax write-off on it. Sometimes they will send you a 1099-C, basically charging you taxes for income because you never paid that credit card debt. And they took the tax write-off, and they usually sold the debt for pennies on the dollar to someone else, some other third party, who, by the way, you do not have a legal agreement with. So yes, you might have a legal agreement with Capital One. You probably do, especially if you had a credit card with them. But when it transfers to someone else, you actually technically don't have a legal contract with this someone else. The thing is, they try to use you, the consumer in the dark who doesn't know the law and doesn't know your rights. They try to use that against you, your ignorance against you. And that's essentially what's happening. And so then they bombard you with harassment and fear tactics to get you to pay up. Otherwise, you're going to have to deal with wage garnishment and lien against your property and them taking money out of your bank account. All these different fear tactics that they use to be able to collect money, because if you think about it, they don't have any other marketing strategy to use to get the money from you. They have nothing else except for fear and harassment. And so what I want to share with you is what to do when you receive that first initial letter. Don't throw it away. Don't, bury your head in the sand. The very moment that you get a letter from a debt collector or collection agency, you need to send them what I call the 809 letter. In fact, here's the letter right here. You can get it for free at my website, which is getdisputeletters.com or secretcreditletters.com. And you want to look for the 809 letter. I believe it's a yellow button that's really big. You can't miss it unless you're blind. And so what you can do is you can download this letter for free. This is a template, and this does two things at once. Number one, it tells them to cease and desist all communication with you, including and especially phone calls, text messages, if that's what they're doing, emails. And the only way that they're allowed to communicate with you is by way of USPS mail, and that's only if they could show proof that you owe them the debt. And by proof, that means, according to federal law, they have to actually show that you owe them the money in something called a chain of title, which means that they have to show that you have a contract or agreement with them. Now, what many of these debt collectors will do, if they in fact have anything at all, which most of the time they don't, because a lot of times what you don't know as a consumer is that the behind the scenes is working in your favor. When a debt collector purchases, say, 1,000 debts from Capital One at a time in one fell swoop, they're not getting 1,000 contracts, 1,000, statements from all the monthly statements that you received from Capital One showing proof that you owe the debt. They're not getting all this paperwork. In fact, in many cases, the agreement between Capital One and a debt collector, or any large bank and a debt collector, is that you don't get any of that. Here is the debt. You are basically purchasing it for 10 cents on the dollar, and we're not going to help you collect on that debt because we failed collecting on that debt. They owe us X amount of dollars. We're giving it to you for 10 cents on the dollar. You're on your own. Screw you. If you want anything else about these people, oh well, you're not going to get it, because according to our agreement that we're going to have between you and I, is that you're not getting any additional information about any of these people in these credit profiles that you just purchased. That is usually the agreement that these large banks have with these debt collectors or collection agencies. A lot of people don't know that they're not going to help assist them in collecting the debt because they failed to get the debt collected on. The banks and the original creditors failed, so they're not going to help somebody else collect on the debt. And so whatever they get is what they get. So usually they get nothing. They get, here's the person's name, address, and phone number, the last one that we have on file. Here's how much that they owe total. And here's the amount you're going to pay us for this debt. We're going to charge it off. We're going to take the tax write-off. We're going to give them a 1099-C. And then you're on your own, okay? You're on your own debt collection company. And so the debt collection company has to turn around and use the only tactic that they know, which is harassment and fear, because they know that they really don't have anything else to peddle to you. So here's how you can use the law in your favor. According to federal law, they have to provide proof of an agreement or contract with them, okay? So many times a debt collector doesn't have anything to show, but if they do, they might by some chance have some statements that you might have from Capital One, or a contract that you might actually have with Capital One. Many times it's a virtual online contract, which it would be somebody's name typed in there, which is technically not even a legit agreement anyway, but that's all they might have. And there's even like maybe a 10 to 20% chance that they'll even have that. Most of the time they have zilcho, okay? So what ends up happening is that if you demand that they show proof of the debt, they're going to send you stuff from Capital One. Well, there's a problem with that, because if your name is called ABC Collection Agency and you're sending me a contract from Capital One, well, how are you in the mix? Where's the chain of title? How do you own this debt to where you now have the ability to collect on it? Otherwise, you're just some rando from outer space that just stepped into the picture. Maybe you rifled through the Capital One file cabinet, stole a bunch of people's contracts, and now you're trying to show that we owe you when, in fact, you just stole some contracts from somebody's file cabinet. Because I don't see your name, ABC Collection Agency, as a party that I've actually contracted with and did business with. So this is the part that the consumer does not understand. This is the part that you are left purposely in the dark about. Whereas if there is no actual contract agreement with the collection agency, or there's no chain of title that shows how Capital One or how the large bank pass this off as ownership onto a collection agency or debt collector, then you technically, legally do not owe the debt collector or collection agency. You do not. So what this powerful 809 letter does is that it basically demands that they show proof that they own the debt and that you owe them the money. And what does not cut the mustard is them sending you a contract from the original creditor. That doesn't cut the mustard. And here's why. because the original creditor has nothing to do with ABC Collection Agency or Debt Collector Rando USA. They have nothing to do with those people at all unless they can show proof with some kind of contract, agreement, or transfer between the two entities that it transferred from this original bank or creditor to the collection agency. And most of the time they're not able to show that because what they do is they buy lots of debt at a time. They'll buy 1,000 debts at a time, 2,000 debt profiles at a time. And they're not going to have a specific contract to show the transfer between the bank or the original creditor and them as it pertains to you solely. It's going to be just, okay, you just bought 1,000 debts from us, ABC Collection Agency. Here you go. Good luck. It's not going to name you in there. It's not going to name, it's going to name maybe you and 999 other people, or it might not name you or anybody. It just basically says you got 1,000 debt profiles for X amount of dollars and good luck to you. So this is why you're never going to see that contract, because you're not actually in the contract between the original creditor and the debt collector. You're never going to see that. And even if you did, by demanding it legally, it's never going to show that you're even in there to begin with. You are just a number as far as they're concerned. And so this letter right here, this 809 letter, is a powerful, powerful letter. It basically stops the debt collectors in their tracks because they won't have this chain of title to show proof that you actually owe them the money. And so this will actually stop them from collecting from you by law, legally, and this is a federal law. This has nothing to do with Monica Main making this up and grabbing it from air. This is an actual federal law. Whereas if they cannot show proof that they own the debt, and they're not going to be able to because you don't have a contract with them, and they're not going to be able to show you the contract that they have between the original creditor and themselves, you technically don't owe them anything. Diddly squat, nothing. So this letter basically says, cease and desist all communication, including debt collection activities against me. And if you happen to have whatever, proof that shows that I owe you the debt, well, go on and mail it off to me, okay? But otherwise, kick rocks is essentially what this says. And it uses all of the legal statutes as well as the federal law that works in your favor. So that's what you should do, and you need to do it within 30 days from the date that you receive any debt collection notices from any kind of debt collection agency. Because many times the letter will say, please validate the debt, or please, you can, say that you don't owe the debt or you do owe the debt or whatever you want to do. You have 30 days to do it. And they'll usually mention that because that is a federal statute that says that this is the debt validation process. And so by basically burying your head in the sand and throwing the debt collection letter away, you're essentially validating the debt, which is kind of like a low blow, and it's a cheat because they don't know whether or not you moved. They don't know whether or not that's your valid address. They don't even know whether or not the letter got lost in the mail because they don't actually require a signature confirmation or anything on it. So within 30 days, you want this 809 letter to go out. Not only do you want it to go out, but you want it to go out certified mail. Certified is with these nice little cards. You have to walk them into the post office. Make sure that you put your address on the back. And by the way, get yourself a post office box, okay? Always use a post office box when you're dealing with these slimy, sleazy individuals because you don't really want them to have your home address. They probably have your home address because that's probably where they mailed the letter to, but who cares? Put a P.O. box on there. If you can't afford a P.O. box, have your mom or dad or brother or sister add you to their P.O. box. They're just going to have to drag you into the post office. You're going to have to show your ID. They'll add you onto the box. Put the P.O. box here only, not even a name, just the P.O. box. And on the front part, you're going to put the name of the creditor or the collection agency right here, and then they're going to basically sign for this. They're going to sign for it, and they're going to have to date it. And many times it's going to be a stamp, so don't be telling me in the comments, well, Monica, they didn't actually sign it. They just stamped something and they stamped the date. Well, yeah, they probably get thousands of these a week, okay? So nobody's going to be standing there signing anything. That's just how it is. And yes, it's okay to send this to a P.O. box because, U.S. Postal Service does deliver to post office boxes. I mean, go figure, right? So this is what we want to do is we want to put our information. A lot of people are like, Monica, I'm not getting the green cards back. Well, did you fill this part out? No, I forgot. Well, okay. Well, how is the post office going to send this back to you if you don't fill this part out on the back? Okay. Front part has to be, again, debt collector here, and the back part is going to be this. You're also going to have to put the tracking number information down here, which is the number that you can see here, and you get these little slips at the post office. This is a two-part deal here. You want this part, this is part one, this is part two, and this number right here will go on this card, okay? And do yourself a favor, if you have a number of these that you're mailing out to, say, 5 different creditors, for example, or debt collection companies, make sure that you do it this way. You fill these out, fill this out, and you leave this stuck on here. Let the U.S. Postal Service person stamp it. They're going to rubber stamp it with the date, and then they're going to peel this off. What ends up happening is a lot of times people will just peel them off themselves. They'll go into the post office, and the post office employee behind the counter is like, well, you need to match up all of these numbers that you wrote down, which is the tracking number here, and you need to match them up, and they're always holding up the line at the post office. Don't be that person, okay? So just leave everything attached, maybe paper clip this on, have the U.S. Postal person just, they'll do all the work for you, okay? Use your P.O. box in the upper left-hand corner there. And then this is where the debt collection company's information is right here. You don't have to use a 9x12 manila envelope. Everybody's always asking me, well, Monica, do I have to use a big envelope? No, you don't. Okay, this is just for demonstration purposes only. You can use a regular number 10 business envelope if you'd like. I just use a bigger one just because I want to show you what this looks like. So on this envelope, you would have the certified thingy-mabopper, obviously on the front, which would be about here. And then this part would go on the back like so. And then that way the debt collector can sign for it, okay? And date it and all that good stuff. Now, this is really important because we need to make sure that we have record of dealing with these people. And by the way, do not include any other identifying information here. Don't include driver's licenses or any copies of utility bills like you would if you're dealing with the credit reporting bureaus. Only scribble your name down here or use your initials. Do not use a legitimate signature here because I've heard stories, horror stories, of debt collectors who are sleazy and unscrupulous who lift off your signature and will apply it to a contract that you never signed. So don't give them that, okay? Make sure that it's just, scribble, scribble. Don't put your phone number, anything like that there. No identifying identification like ID copies or anything like that. So we now have a paper trail. So this is what we have now. What ends up happening is you sent this letter out. You're going to get this card back. If for whatever reason you don't get the card back, doesn't matter because you have a tracking number and you can track it and make sure you print off the tracking information to show proof that they received the letter, the envelope. And what ends up happening is that now you have invalidated the debt. The ball's in their court. They're going to have to show proof of the debt in some way. What they're going to probably end up doing, and don't freak out when this happens because everybody does, they'll send you some statements from the original creditor. Or maybe they'll actually send you a signed contract from the original creditor. But here's the problem with that. It's with the original creditor. That's not with them. ABC collection agency is not on any of those documents or any of those statements. So they're just some random third party. They have nothing to do. It looks like they literally ransacked somebody's file cabinet and stole somebody's file, your file, out of some bank's file cabinet, and basically said that this is our contract. That's not what we call a chain of title. That doesn't show anything except they just robbed somebody's file cabinet. That's all it shows. So here's, according to federal law, what is considered a validation of debt, which would be a valid contract or agreement. Statements and invoices do not count. So many times what will happen is these debt collectors, if they have anything or can get anything from the original creditor, they will give you statements and invoices. And according to federal law, that's not a validation of debt. It is not a validation of debt at all to simply send out an invoice or a statement, especially from some other creditor, without showing how the transfer of title occurred from the original creditor to themselves. So you want to save all this. In fact, anytime you're trying to fix your credit, you guys, you need to keep meticulous records, paper records, actual paper records that you file in a file cabinet of your own. Maybe get yourself a small file cabinet. Get yourself a lot of those manila folders, and you want to make sure that you keep maybe a file folder for every single one of your debt collectors, because this is going to come up later on in your history, for good and for bad. And I'm going to explain to you both, okay? So what ends up happening is, say, for example, your creditor, your debt collector receives this letter. 2 weeks later, they send you a statement from Capital One showing that you owe Capital One money. It's like, okay, that's great, except that there's two problems with that. One, according to federal law, that's not considered a validation of debt. Number two, it doesn't show the chain of title on how it went from Capital One to ABC Collection Agency. There's no chain of title. So it basically shows that they just picked up, a statement off the sidewalk somewhere and said that, you owe them the money, and really they're not even on the document at all. So it's not considered a valid form or proof that you owe them the money. So then what happens? Well, what you can do with this letter is you could basically send the letter to Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion along with this card that you received back hopefully by now from the U.S. Postal Service. Some of these cards take about 30 days, which is fine because you can't really send a dispute to Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion showing this card with the letter that you sent until 30 calendar days has gone by since they received the card anyway, which will be the date that they stamp on here. So 30 days after the date that they stamp on here, you can send a copy of this card with a copy of this letter to Experian, Equifax, TransUnion saying you tried to validate the debt as per federal law. They did not give me anything that would support me owing them the money. Now, you don't discombobulate the story and say, well, they did send me this, but it didn't, it isn't in accordance to federal law. You don't say that. You just say they didn't send me anything as per federal law, as required, meaning that a statement does not count. So don't even mention that you received anything at all. So that's how you can get it off of your Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion credit reports if these debt collectors are showing up on your credit reports, which, 9 times out of 10 they are. But in the meantime, what you do is you wait. So sometimes the debt collector, depending on how much you owe, will possibly serve you with a lawsuit. Now, this is not the part that you panic and you start to, hyperventilate in a corner as you're crying. You don't do that. Instead, what you can do is if you are served a lawsuit, you can use this as a paper trail to show that you tried to get the validation of debt and the chain of title of this debt from the debt collector, and they did not give you anything. But for the court, the purpose of the court, you're going to also include what they did send to you, which is not in accordance to federal law. So if they did send you a statement from Capital One or a contract from some other bank that wasn't them, that is not in accordance with federal law because it doesn't show the chain of title and how they came in happenstance to have this debt to be able to collect from you. So you want to keep all the documents that you receive. And again, each debt collector needs to have its own manila envelope, your own little envelope that you're keeping, your own little file. So then that way, if they do sue you, you can turn the tables. And again, don't panic if they sue you, but you want to respond to the lawsuit. I recommend this website. It's called neverloseincourt.com. You can get the free jurisdictionary flowchart. And it's a course that's taught by a Florida licensed attorney. And it's just an amazing course. It's saved me in court, I don't know how many times, using all of his strategies. But initially what he always tells people to do is file what we call a flurry of motion. So before you file an answer, you start to pick apart the lawsuit itself, starting with service. Were you properly served? Because if you weren't properly served, then your first motion to dismiss would be for improper service or insufficient service. So you first try to target the service itself. If the service was valid, if you were outside washing your car, the process server came up to you and got you with the service, well, then that's a proper service. So the next thing you can begin to invalidate is the rest of the lawsuit. And in this case, it will be for the purposes of motion to dismiss for lack of standing. And you can also combine that with a different motion as well, because you want to make it very clear that they're not the actual party. They're an improper party, meaning that they're not showing how they are part of the chain of title. So there's technically two motions in one that you'll be filing together in one motion to dismiss for lack of standing, and then also making it known to the court that they're not also the proper or real party. It's what we call a real party in this. They're just some rando that came into the picture. It's almost as if you borrowing some money from your neighbor. Say you borrow $1,000 cash from your neighbor, and you have a verbal agreement, and you tell your neighbor you're going to pay him, 30 days from now, and you never pay him, and, a year goes by and he's just giving you dirty looks every single time he's watering his lawn, and you feel uncomfortable, but you're just like, well, I don't have the money, I'm not going to pay him. And then all of a sudden, some other neighbor down the street comes up and starts banging on your door saying, well, you owe me $1,000 plus interest because, I bought that debt from your neighbor and he didn't want to deal with you anymore, so I'm here to collect. It would be Guido. Guido from down the street is starting to collect from you. And you're like, I'm sorry, Guido, I don't have a contract with you, a verbal agreement with you, nothing with you. Who the hell are you, Guido? So that's kind of what these debt collectors are like. It's just like they have to show chain of title. So Guido would literally have to show a contract that he has with your neighbor, showing that the chain of title changed, the ownership of the debt changed from your neighbor to Guido. And the problem is most of these debt collectors don't even have a chain of title. And so that's how you can actually win in court. So you go to neverloseincourt.com. If you are being sued, you want to take that crash course. It will save you. And as long as you are creating documents, which, by the way, you can have the help of ChatGPT help you create the documents that you need to file in court. Most of the time you can upload these motions into the courthouse website. You don't have to go down and file anything. And what you can do is file your motions and start picking apart the lawsuit itself. And in your first motion, well, not the first one, because if the first one's a motion to dismiss for insufficient or improper service, that would be your first motion. But maybe technically your second motion for lack of standing and not naming the correct party, you would include this as an exhibit. So Exhibit A would be this, copy of this showing that the creditor or debt collection agency received this. Exhibit B, the actual letter you sent. And Exhibit C would be what they actually sent you back, which was the statement, the invoice, or even the actual contract from the original creditor, not showing them on there at all. So you would use what they sent to you, and the only time you would actually use it is in a court document as exhibits showing what they sent, and making sure that in your motion you're citing federal law stating that according to federal law, this is not a validation of debt. An invoice is not a validation of debt. A statement is not a validation of debt. And somebody else's contract is not a validation of debt. And it certainly is not proof of how the chain of title moved over from, creditor A to debt collector B. It doesn't show any proof of that at all, and they fail to show by law, according to federal law, as per my request for debt validation. They didn't provide any of that. So you're going to include this, a copy of this, as your exhibit in your lawsuit against the creditor or collection agency. And what's really cool about this is that many times, as long as you do your paperwork correctly, the court will side with you. Now, I know I have a lot of people who always argue with me. Monica, the court didn't side with me. But the way they usually type out their comments is probably reflective in how they're probably typing out their motions. And if anything is sloppy, miscommunicated, all lowercase, no proper punctuation, everything slopped together like some of you do because you don't have the ability to write in the English language properly, well, of course the court's not going to side with you. The court's just going to see a mess that's not put together properly. So this is why you want to be very, very on point when you respond to these lawsuits with your motions. You want the motion to kind of look like the summons that you received, or the complaint, which is the lawsuit. So whatever the lawsuit says, as far as how it's written, as far as the district at the very top, the court case number, the judge, all the stuff is exactly how it's written in the summons. That's what you need to mirror in your motion. That's how you need to do it. And then, of course, your motion is going to be different than what their stuff says as far as the summons and so forth. And your motion is going to be in order. And what you're going to do is put, motion to dismiss for lack of standing or whatever you're going to be putting for your motion. And then you will have ChatGPT do the rest of it for you. But you got to be careful because ChatGPT can give you the lingo and the language, but you're going to have to copy and paste it to make sure that it lines up with the motion document. The motion document is, has numbers and it looks like a specific kind of court document. And again, as long as you look at the summons and kind of copy what the summons looks like in that district where you're at, and you kind of create and mirror that image of exactly what the summons looks like for your motion, then you'll be able to properly structure it. Just make sure that when you copy and paste from ChatGPT, that you can keep, all of that structure to make sure that it's properly done. And then if it's done correctly, the court will side with you. If it's slopped together and it looks like you didn't even graduate and get through the 3rd grade, then the court's going to say that this is a blatant lack of respect. This person is just clearly, not all there, and we're certainly not going to side with this individual. Because what a lot of people don't understand is that in most cases, not all, because there's horror stories across the board everywhere, but in most cases, the court will try to side with the consumer, knowing that most of these debt collectors are unscrupulous and doing illegal activity and always trying to put the screws to people, the average person, illegally. And so most of the time, most judges will try to side with the consumer in these types of scenarios, if you're putting together your motions correctly. If you're not, they're not going to side with you. That's just the reality of how things are, and that's the reality of how things go. So if you are sued, I don't want you to be afraid. I certainly don't want you to not show up and not respond, but you always respond with your flurry of motions first before you ever file the answer. And the flurry of motions will at least stop them from putting a judgment against you, and it'll just kind of kick the can down the road for the lawsuit and kind of just allow the opposing parties, legal team to drain their funds, because that's what you want to do, is just keep putting motion after motion, whatever motion you think you can come up with, you want to put the motion in. So then that way it just kind of makes them just get bored, and they just want to go with the low-hanging fruit, the easy target. They don't want to go with the one who's going to fight. It's almost like the bully on the play yard, where the bully wants to pick on somebody who's not going to fight back. And that's kind of what debt collectors are. They don't want to pick on someone who's not going to fight back. They just want the easy target, the easy money, the easy wage garnishment, the easy lien on the property, the easy, taking money out of your bank account. That's what they want. They don't want the person who's the fighter who's going to fight back. So just be armed with knowledge and understand your consumer rights. I know I'm going to get comments about, oh, Monica, this and that. If you don't understand how debt collection rules, laws, and contracts work, please don't make comments, because you really don't understand how the behind the scenes works. And you're never going to see the contract that's with the original creditor and debt collection agency. They're never going to give that to you, because it's never going to show your name on it. And in many cases, it's not even going to show your account number on it either, which means that that's why they're never going to show that chain of title transfer, because they can't, because it doesn't exist. So before you assume anything, and by the way, that's also part of their marketing and sales strategy, and how they're able to use and leverage fear and harassment against you, is because you don't know what actually goes on behind the scenes. You don't know. And they bank on that. They bank on you not knowing. Okay? So please arm yourself with knowledge. If you do get sued, go to neverloseincourt.com. Get the free jurisdictionary, download chart, understand exactly how the whole lawsuit system works. You can technically, if you win that lawsuit, or in the very least, even during the lawsuit after you file your answer, you can also do a counterclaim against the creditor for harassment, punitive damages, for stress, and for all these other things that they're putting you through. You can very well win some money with a counterclaim. So don't be afraid of these people. Just arm yourself with knowledge and, go after these people. Go after their throats, because they're not used to people standing up against them. They're just used to people being in fear and, quivering in their boots and wanting to just comply with whatever fear-based tactic that they're using that week to try to collect money from you. So that's how you can deal with it. Now, some of you might be like, well, pay your bills. I always get those comments. Pay your bills. Well, yes, I always tell people, if you do have the bill, try not to get it to the point where it's going to a debt collector. Try to negotiate with the original creditor if you can before it's charged off. Usually by the time it's charged off, it's too late, because they've already taken the tax write-off. They've likely already sent you a 1099-C, and they've already transferred it over and sold it to a debt collector, which means technically they can't even take any money from you. Even if they wanted to, they can't. So before it's charged off, hopefully you can try to find some way to settle, some way to minimize the dollar amount, or whatever you can do. I do other videos that will train you on exactly how to use something called restrictive endorsement, if you can possibly do that. But that's going to require you to have a little bit of money, even upwards of anywhere from 10 to 50% of the debt, to be able to do something called restrictive endorsement. And it's not even legal in all the states. So you need to be aware of that, that it's not legal. Some of the states don't even recognize restrictive endorsements, so you have to be careful with that as well. So that's an option. I'm always about trying to pay your bills if you can. I'm always about trying to settle if you can. You could always try to settle with the debt collector if you just don't want to deal with the lawsuit and you're just like, well, maybe I could just try to settle for 25% of the debt, and knowing that they paid only 10% of the debt, maybe they'll take that. Maybe they'd rather take that, rather than nothing. But remember, if you're ever going to negotiate with them, number one, make sure that if you call them on the phone, you understand that they're going to be recording the conversation. So you immediately want to say, I do not admit to or deny this debt. I don't even remember owing this debt. I still to this day don't even think I owe this debt, but I would like to talk about maybe getting this off my credit report. So how can we talk about doing that? So don't ever admit to the debt. You don't have to deny the debt. Don't admit to it. Just say, I'm not admitting to the debt. I don't even remember that this debt even existed, and I'm not admitted to this at all. I don't even remember that this ever existed. I still to this day don't think I owe this, but what can I do to get this off my credit report, because I'd like to retain my credit rating? And then if you're going to negotiate, then you want to make sure that whatever they negotiate and agree to is in writing, that they send you something in writing before you cut a check to them, before you send them a money order or a cashier's check or pay them in any way. You want to make sure that it's in writing that they are going to settle this debt from original creditor with account number blah, blah, blah of X amount of dollars. They're going to take X amount of dollars to be able to settle this debt, and they will show paid as agreed on your credit report or settled as agreed on your credit report. That's what they will show. So you need to make sure that that's all in writing if you're going to negotiate on the debt. Be careful though. Be careful, because sometimes they're pretty slick and they will get you to try to admit to things on the phone. And if it's an older debt, if they get you to admit to it and even put a down payment of $10 on the debt, that actually re-ages the debt from day one. And so if you have a debt that's like 5 years old, that would fall off at the 7-year mark, they can get it to re-age on day one, meaning that you now have a total of 7 years left dealing with this debt if they get you to, number one, agree to the debt, and number two, pay a small down payment of, say, $10 to get the process rolling. Then you just re-aged your debt. So that's the last thing you want to do if you're not in the position to do it. So most of you know I'm not here to judge you. I've dealt with my own share of financial situations and credit situations over the years. I understand that things happen. Usually we have the best of intention going in, and we try to make good on our debts. Most of us don't go out there and try to run up a bunch of debt just to screw banks over. Most of us don't do that as part of our MO. At least I hope that's not your MO. But mistakes happen. Sometimes we get in over our head. Everything kind of hit the fan during the pandemic. A lot of people got in over their heads with credit. And then, of course, nowadays, it's certainly not helping that things are just, super expensive to the point where people have been living off of credit for the last year or so. So, plus maybe you had an accident. Maybe you ended up in the hospital. Maybe you lost your job. Maybe you tried to find a new job and you couldn't find a new job. I'm not here to judge, okay? And anybody that wants to drop comments, that want to drop judgy comments, please don't, because you just thank the lucky stars that you've been lucky enough to not have to deal with a catastrophe of some kind financially. But some of you have. And I know in my school group, which, by the way, if you're not part of school, go to school.com/Monica Main. And you can DM me directly for those of you that want to DM me directly. But I have a lot of people, especially a lot of women who got out of abusive relationships, who are literally starting over, or they had to take on, a co-applicant's, debt from a deadbeat, ex-husband or something. Things happen, but just pick yourself up, dust yourself off, forgive yourself for the mistakes that you made, and then make a promise that moving forward, you're going to do better. That's all you can do. And so please note that I did write the first, only, and last book you'll never, ever need on credit. It's called Credit Millionaire 2.0. You can get this on Amazon. You can get the Audible version as well. I'm going to be releasing the physical version that I'm going to be shipping out of my office soon. So I'll be on the lookout for that. Credit Millionaire 2.0 is literally the only book that you'll ever need that also talks about all the consumer debt laws that go into your favor when it comes to fixing and rebuilding your personal credit. But it also talks about, in fact, right here, you can get started with starting to build credit, corporate credit we call it. Where did I see that? corporate credit to be able to get hundreds of thousands of dollars in unsecured credit to be able to build a business, buy a business, invest in real estate. I don't know where the hell it was. So literally, this is the only book you'll ever need on credit. You can get the free version. It's Credit Millionaire 1.0. You can get it at school.com/Monica Main. And it mostly talks about the business or corporate credit side where you can use OPM or other people's money to access up to hundreds of thousands of dollars in unsecured credit, even with a brand spanking new business, because you do have to start a business or a corporation to get the money. And you can get it for free at school.com/Monica Main. It's also the community where you can get my other book, The Lost Secret, which will share with you exactly how to change your mindset and start to attract the things that you truly want in life. Because let's face it, if you don't already have a side hustle income business going to make cash flow, I could talk to you until I'm blue in the face about all this credit stuff and how to fix your credit. But the reality is, at the end of the day, you need to start making some more money. And this book will actually help you. So it's called The Lost Secret. You can get it at school.com/Monica Main. Once you're admitted into the group, which takes about 24 hours, simply go to Classroom, the Classroom tab, and look for The Lost Secret, look for Credit Millionaire, and get those downloads for free. If you found that this content was helpful, give me a nice thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, drop some comments down below. This is Monica Main signing off, and I will see you in the next video.